The Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy. Go to CarrieLutz.com and sign up for 30 free micro trainings on financial survival.
1490 WGCH. This is Carrie Lutz, and you're listening to the Financial Survival Network, which is brought to you by Miles Franklin. They've been in business selling gold and silver for over 20 years, and I'm a customer because when you buy, they ship. For more information, find them on the web at milesfranklin.com or give them a call at 800-822-8080 and get a free quote. There's a bank run coming to a bank near you. Right now, the bank runs are occurring in Europe, but for some reason, the mainstream American media isn't sharing that information with you. But we can get the information right from somebody who's in Europe. I've got Alasdair Macleod on the phone with me. He is senior fellow at the GoldMoney Foundation. He also has a blog, financeandeconomics.org, a lot of great writing about economic theory in there and how it translates into reality. Hey, Alasdair, welcome back to the Financial Survival Network. That's
lovely. Hello, Kerry.
It's good to hear you again, even though we're across the pond from one another. But a lot of interesting things going on in the continent, isn't there?
Well, that's right. It's the old Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times. Not proverb, curse, I think.
Curse, yes.
Curse, yes. Yes, I mean, Europe in particular is going through the mill at the moment. And every day we wake up, there's something nasty in the works. I mean, this last week, or last weekend, 100 billion euros was conjured up to save the Spanish banking system. And that compares with a request for something like 40 billion. So 2.5 times what was deemed necessary by the Spanish government has been offered in principle. And one would have thought that you'd get a positive reaction from the markets, but there's little more than a dead cat bounce. And within hours, markets were heading south again. And today, I understand that yields on Spanish debt now exceed 7%, which doesn't necessarily mean anything in particular, except everyone's running around saying that, when it goes over 7%, it's a real crisis. It's a real crisis anyway, so I don't know why 7% has got anything to do with it. And quite frankly, I don't think any of your listeners would lend money to Spain at less than 10%.
Well, I know a guy in Jersey, his name's Tony Soprano, and yes. He would probably loan them money, but he'd want some collateral, like probably some of those Picassos over in the museum there. He'd probably take the firstborn of the president of Spain. He'd want some serious collateral, and he'd probably be getting about 120% annual interest because he's already loaning money to Greece, and pretty soon, they're going to cart off the Parthenon because that was the collateral for his loan.
Well, I think he might have a little difficulty collecting the collateral, but anyway, it is not good at the moment. It really isn't.
Yeah, it has an understatement, and people are pulling their money out of banks. What are they doing? Are they taking the cash? Are they moving the capital to Singapore, to Switzerland, to Germany?
The answer is they are both taking the cash. And there is also capital flight. And so far, most of the capital flight actually has moved from countries such as Greece, Spain, Italy, Portugal, to Germany, the Netherlands to a lesser extent, and also Luxembourg. And the mechanism whereby this is all balanced out so that you don't end up with no euros in Greece, for example, and lots of euros in Germany, is the what's called the Target 2 settlement system. And what Target does is it creates a mechanism whereby when euros leave Greece, the National Bank of Greece creates euros to replace them, when those euros arrive in Germany, they're withdrawn from circulation by the Bundesbank, and in the books of the two central banks, a loan is created whereby the National Bank of Greece owes the money to the Bundesbank. When I last looked at the balance for the capital flight, and remember, this is something, this shouldn't occur. This should all balance out, so there shouldn't be these huge, great loans developing. But at the last count, the Bundesbank was owed just under 700 billion euros.
Oh.
And that's a measure of the capital flight that had occurred up until the end of last month.
That's almost $1 trillion. And what you're looking at there is, they're going to put in capital controls at some point. They can't allow that to go on, right? I read $1 billion a day is leaving the banks of Greece and Spain and probably Italy. It's going to sweep the continent, because once confidence is lost, confidence can't just be easily restored, can it?
That's right. I don't know what they're going to do on that. Certainly there are all sorts of rumors about capital controls coming in, and also changing the Schengen Agreement to restrict people crossing borders. So, but it's very difficult, really, to separate out what people are sort of anticipating is going to happen and what actually is happening on the ground. But there's no doubt about it, this is a huge, great mess, and the burden that's faced by the German people through Target 2 imbalances, as well as calls on them to give up some of their savings to bail out the profligate countries, the pressure on the Germans is absolutely enormous. And, they've got the sort of history, if you like, of 2 world wars, which makes them think, well, we will always owe something to the world, so we've got to be nice. You've got that on the one hand. On the other hand, you've got a nation which has already seen 2 monetary collapses, once in the years after World War I, and also they were completely wiped out monetary-wise at the end of when they lost World War II.
Sure.
They're now facing their 3rd in a century. I mean, this is... You can understand why the German voter is not at all happy with this situation.
Yeah.
I mean, would you be? I mean, it actually is a very, very nasty situation for them. And as well as that, Europe is not the place of opportunity as far as Germany is concerned. It is true that the neighboring countries are a large market for, all their sort of, their machine tools and Mercedes-Benz and BMWs and all the rest of it. But the growing markets for Germany actually are the developing markets like China, Brazil, Russia, Africa even. And so the future, I mean, if you're an entrepreneur in Germany, you think, well, stuff Europe, my opportunities are elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And that has got to have some bearing on the politics of the whole situation from Germany's point of view. It must do. But we haven't seen that mentioned anyway yet.
Right. Yeah, well, that's definitely true. But on the other hand, the EU is the developing world's biggest market, because China, 25% of their exports go there. And I would assume that most of the other developing economies, 25% to the EU, 20% to the US, and then the rest gets scattered around. So we're all one big happy world. And really, if one of these consuming centers falls, which it appears to me is happening both in the US and in Europe, then those developing countries are in for a hard time too, aren't they? Because they're export-based.
Yes, that's absolutely right. The largest economic unit in the world is the European Union. And to have that fall over, it has very, very serious global implications. It's got global implications not only in terms of trade, but of course of the global banking system. And here I discovered something quite interesting, and that is that while cross-border loans within Europe by European banks, in other words, the loans that a French bank would make to Italy, that has been declining quite substantially over the last 3 years. cross-border loans from American banks into Europe has actually been increasing.
Right.
And it's increased about 60% over that period of time on average. Some countries a lot more than others, I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'm right in saying that American banks are on the hook for around about 340 billion euros. Now, that's a lot of money. I mean, it may not be a lot of money to the Fed, who are quite happy to print $1 trillion, sort of at the drop of a hat. But,
yeah.
If you're a bank, this is real money. I mean, it's
Sure.
as simple as that. And I wonder when this is going to really come out and be understood by the American public. Your banks, I mean, it's also the large Wall Street banks, really, because as I understand the American banking system, an awful lot of the system, the vast majority of banks actually hardly are even networked into international settlements. It's really all the Wall Street banks. So
right.
If we're looking at 350 billion euros, then it's the J.P. Morgans, it's the Goldman Sachs, it's all those, the Citibanks, all those really big guys. And that's going to be a serious hit if the Eurozone completely falls over. It's a bit early at this stage to say that the whole of the Eurozone will fall over, but you've got to think about the implications. Already we see the problems or the pressures building on Italy. And guess who has lent most money to Italy? It's the French banks. So you're then looking at a systemic problem in France. And it goes on and on and on and on. It's all interconnected in Europe. This is a real crisis. It cannot be contained within, let's say, just Greece or just Greece and Spain or even just Greece, Spain, Portugal and Italy. It's, France is very vulnerable in this one as well, and she has not got the dynamic economy required to support this. When I mean dynamic economy, I mean she's anywhere as rich as Germany. She's got her own problems. Her own debt to GDP is sort of getting up towards 90%. I think it was 87% on the last time I looked at it. Her budget deficit, I think, is running at about 6%, something like that. It's, she's got her own problems. None of these countries are in a position to bail each other out. And this is a joke, really, about this 100 billion for Spain. They don't have it. I mean,
sure.
There's nothing else you can say, because they're relying for a large portion of this, for example, to come from Italy. But Italy's already in trouble. So how are they going to pay for it?
Good question.
It's a mess, Kerry. It is a mess.
Good question. And that leads us to the way forward here, because what we're talking about are all these debts that can't be paid back. They're unsustainable, unfinanceable, and pretty soon they won't be able to be rolled over except with excessive printing, creation of new currency units. So what we have is the money supply constantly getting larger and larger to service the debt, because the productive capacity that would normally service debt isn't there. So we're talking pretty much in the final analysis a global financial reset, aren't we?
Yes, I'm afraid so. And we're at an interesting time, I think, in this whole sinking of Europe, because Germany is holding out and saying, well, look, there really makes no sense for us to chuck more money at this problem. They turn around and say, we cannot do anything unless there is complete integration of this, that, the other thing, knowing that that is totally impractical. And I don't blame them for taking that view. I think it's completely understandable. Equally, the ECB is limited in terms of what it can do operationally to keep the banking system solvent. It cannot just print money for the benefit of sovereign states within the Eurozone in the way the Fed can and the Bank of England can and the Bank of Japan can. And, because it's sort of the rules that set it up are very, very real. So you've got Germany and Finland in particular. Finland's another one. They're really sort of sticklers for not changing the status quo, in the sense that that's not what the bank was set up to do. And it's completely understandable. Now, I think that the strategy to deal with these objections really are to wait for the moment when there really is absolutely no alternative but for the ECB to print money. And I think what then might happen is that you will get coordinated quantitative easing amongst all the major central banks. But it'll have to happen at a time, I think, when Germany cannot object. In other words, the alternative is quite simple, and that is the end of the Eurozone.
and that's really the ultimate admission of failure, isn't it?
It is. And the one thing that makes me suspect that this could be an outcome is the way the Fed and recently the Bank of England as well have said, no, we're not doing any more quantitative easing. They've been holding off, if you like. Now, if you're holding off, then presumably you're holding off for a purpose. And I think the holding off for the purpose might well be so that they have got some bullets to fire at the markets at some stage to handle the fallout from the European situation.
Yeah, and what's that going to do to the price of gold and silver? Well, I think they're still buying bonds, but they're doing it stealthily because until confidence is really close to evaporating totally, they want to make it look like they're protecting the currency's value. But then when push comes to shove, they're going to have to do the QE because they don't know any other way to do it. Otherwise, it's massive debt repudiation, and they'll have to nationalize every bank in the world pretty much because there will be bank runs all over the place, right? Yeah.
And there is another reason why QE is going to happen again, and that is that government borrowing is just so high. And if I move away from Europe and I look at the US and also the UK and also Japan, government borrowing is running at such a high pace that cannot be sustained at anything like current interest rates without the central bank actually funding it by printing money.
Yeah.
And that, to my mind, is actually the big reason. Well, the two big reasons, and they work together. One big reason is the one I've just described, and that is so that governments can fund their deficits at affordable rates, i.e. zero or close to zero as possible. And the second reason is by doing this, you inject money into the banking system and you stop the banking system falling over. Mm-hmm. And so those two objectives, twin objectives, work by printing money. And the reason that Europe is falling over is because the ECB does not have this facility. Otherwise, I see no difference in the financial position between the European countries and America and the UK and Japan. It's just a question of degree.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that you've pretty well summed up the conundrum that the world finds itself in, and they're not willing to go back to sound money because I think you and I will both agree that all these problems emanate from fiat currency and from every country's attempt to manipulate the value of their currency to improve their trade balance, all that good stuff. And until we go back to sound money, like we had with the classical gold standard, which led to a period of unparalleled prosperity and peace in the world, we're just going to be going around in circles, and there really isn't going to be any solution whatsoever to this issue.
I think that's right. And really what's happened is that the political classes have fallen hook, line, and sinker for the neoclassical argument, which sees no objection to governments intervening to try and help an economic outcome, or governments intervening to try and achieve a social outcome. And governments are they're still trying to do that. And they don't seem to realize that, initially they wanted to destroy savings because they saw inherited wealth and all that sort of stuff as being unfair. So the rentier, as Keynes despisingly called the the capitalist in the back in the 20s and 30s. It's really been to take the money off the rentier, to take it off these wicked people who haven't even soiled their hands to earn it, and who immorally make money out of interest by lending it to people. Sort of, you can see the overtones of usury and all the rest of it. And so that you have this sort of social objective to transfer wealth from them to the ordinary people, the trade union member, the worker. And, of course, this backfires. And as it backfires, then the next thing you do is you try and intervene in the economy to try and improve the economy. And, of course, there is absolutely no way that government can replace society. And by society, I mean the means by which people get together in order to exchange the fruits of their labor. This is not something that government can have any part in other than maybe setting some groundwork rules, and that is it. So we're now in the situation where they've destroyed people's savings, and what is left is being destroyed at an accelerating rate now with zero interest rates. And, the only thing they can do is print money to make up that shortfall. And it is last chance saloon. It's the end of that road. And unfortunately, it means that in Europe, for example, governments are taking yet more and more money off people and hampering an economy's ability to progress itself as a result. I mean, look at what's happening in Italy. Mario Monti is introducing draconian taxes, and his collectors are going around doing the most extraordinary things to try and collect this money. And really all you're doing is you're taking money from the productive part of the economy and redeploying it in the unproductive part of the economy. And that is no solution to the problems that Italy or any other country in that situation actually faces. So they're making things worse with everything they do.
Yeah, that is what it comes down to, is there's no solutions, certainly not the solutions that they're pursuing, because they're unwilling or unable or just intellectually dishonest, and they refuse to understand the nature of the problem here is that you can't have debt exceeding GDP growth, and GDP I don't like because it's not a true measure of wealth creation, but let's just use it because that's what we have to work with now. You can't have debt going up faster than GDP indefinitely and expect this to be a sustainable system, because if there's not underlying wealth creation in these societies, then the ability to service that debt eventually isn't going to be there, and then we're toast, which is where we're at now. And we got to get going, Alasdair. But hey, for people to find out more about your work and what you're doing at GoldMoney Foundation, where do they go?
They go to goldmoney.com, and there's a link saying research on the right-hand side of the menu, as it were, along the top. And if there's a drop-down menu on that, and you'll find a whole load of articles, including ones written by me, and also podcasts and things like that, such as we're doing now. And there's my own site, financeandeconomics.org.
Been great talking to you, Alasdair. Always fun and enlightening, and thanks for giving us the update on what's really going on in Europe, because the U.S. mainstream media, regardless who it's comprised of, is keeping you, keeping me, totally in the dark.
Well, it's very nice talking to you again, Kerry, and it's very much my pleasure, and I hope that this is enlightening for your listeners.
Absolutely, and we'll talk to you again soon after the next domino falls.
Well, maybe the Greek election.
Could be. Could very well be.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Kerry.